There are some things you see that change you forever. Not in the way people usually mean, not like watching a sunset or holding your first child. I mean the kind of seeing that splits your life clean in two, before and after. I'm 55 years old now, and I've spent more than half my life carrying a secret so heavy it's worn grooves into my soul. I'm telling you this because I'm tired. Because the weight of silence becomes its own kind of death. And because what I saw in those woods 32 years ago still visits me every night when I close my eyes. My name is John Mackenzie, and I saw a Wendigo eating something horrifying. Then it noticed me. I was 23 that winter, fresh out of college with a forestry degree and romantic notions about solitude. The Park Service stationed me at a remote ranger outpost in northern Minnesota, 15 miles from the nearest town, surrounded by dense pine forests and frozen lakes that stretched to the Canadian border. It was exactly what I'd wanted. A small cabin with a wood stove, a radio for emergencies, and nothing but wilderness in every direction. My father had died the year before, cancer that ate through him in 6 brutal months, and I'd chosen isolation like medicine. I thought the quiet would help me heal. The winter of 1993 came early and hard. By November, snow had already buried the forest under 3 feet of white silence. I spent my days checking trail markers, monitoring for illegal hunting, and splitting firewood that I'd stack against the cabin's north wall. At night, I'd read by lamplight and listen to the wind move through the pines like breath through enormous lungs. I'd never felt lonely. Not until that night in late December when everything changed. It was past midnight. I'd been asleep maybe 2 hours when something woke me. Not a sound exactly, but the absence of sound. The forest had gone completely silent in a way that made my skin crawl. No wind. No branches creaking. Nothing. I lay there in the dark, listening to my own heartbeat, and that's when I heard it. A wet, tearing sound. Like fabric ripping but deeper, more organic. It was coming from behind the cabin, maybe 50 yards into the trees. I should have stayed inside. Every instinct I had screamed to pull the blankets over my head and wait for dawn. But I was young and stupid and still thought I understood the world. I pulled on my boots and heavy coat, grabbed my flashlight and the rifle I kept for bears, and stepped out into the December cold. The moon was nearly full, turning the snow into a carpet of pale blue light. My breath came out in clouds that hung in the frozen air. I could see my boot prints from earlier that day, crisp and undisturbed, leading toward the woodshed. And beyond them, in the deeper snow between the trees, other tracks. Massive tracks. Each footprint was easily 2 feet long, pressed deep into the snow with a stride that seemed impossibly wide for any animal I knew. The tearing sound came again. Closer now. My hands were shaking as I raised the flashlight, and when I thumbed it on, the beam cut through the darkness like a blade. That's when I saw it. 20 yards away, crouched over something dark and ragged in the snow, was a creature that shouldn't exist. It was huge, maybe 8 feet tall, even bent over like it was. Its body was emaciated, all angles and protruding bones covered in matted fur that seemed to shift between gray and white in the moonlight. The limbs were too long, jointed wrong, ending in hands that looked almost human except for the claws. But it was the head that froze the breath in my lungs. Elongated like a deer's skull, but covered in stretched skin, with antlers that branched up into the darkness like winter branches stripped of leaves. It was eating. I could see now what the dark shape was. A deer torn open, steam still rising from the exposed cavity. The creature's muzzle was buried in the carcass, and the wet sounds I'd heard were it feeding, pulling meat and organs free with those impossible hands. My flashlight beam hit its back, and it froze. Just stopped completely, like someone had pressed pause on a film. For maybe 3 seconds, neither of us moved. I couldn't move. My legs had turned to stone, my finger frozen on the flashlight's button. The rifle might as well have been a toy in my other hand. Then slowly, so slowly it seemed to take forever, the creature turned its head to look at me. I've spent 32 years trying to describe what I saw in those eyes. They weren't animal eyes. They weren't human eyes either. They were something else entirely, something that recognized me in a way that went beyond simple predator awareness. There was intelligence there, ancient and cold and utterly alien. The creature's face was streaked with blood, dark against the pale fur and exposed bone structure of its elongated skull. Its breath came out in great plumes of steam, and I could smell it even from 20 yards away, a smell like decay and pine needles and something else I couldn't name. We stared at each other. The forest remained silent. The moon hung overhead like a witness. And in that moment, I understood with perfect clarity that my life depended on what happened in the next few seconds. That this creature could close the distance between us before I could even raise the rifle. That I was going to die in this frozen wilderness, alone, and no one would ever know what happened to me. The Wendigo's jaw opened slightly, revealing teeth that were too long, too sharp, stained dark with fresh blood. A sound came out, low and resonant, somewhere between a growl and something that might have been words in a language older than humanity. The sound vibrated in my chest, made my teeth ache, filled my head with a pressure that felt like it might crack my skull open. Then, impossible as everything else, the creature did something I never expected. It straightened up slowly, rising to its full height, still watching me with those terrible eyes. And it took one step backward. Then another. Moving away from its kill, away from me, deeper into the darkness between the trees. The antlers caught the moonlight one final time, and then it was gone, melting into the shadows like smoke, leaving only those enormous tracks in the snow and the torn carcass steaming in the December night. I stood there until dawn, unable to move, unable to process what I'd seen. When the sun finally rose and painted the snow pink and gold, I walked back to my cabin on legs that barely held me. I locked the door. I loaded every chamber of the rifle. And I sat at my small wooden table, staring at nothing, knowing that my life had just been divided into before and after, and that I'd never be the same man again. I didn't report what I'd seen. How could I? I imagined calling it in over the radio. Yeah, headquarters, I saw a Wendigo last night. 8 feet tall, eating a deer behind my cabin. Should I fill out an incident report? They'd have pulled me off the mountain by noon, sent me for psychiatric evaluation, and that would have been the end of my career before it even started. So I kept silent. I told myself it was a bear I'd seen, that the moonlight and shadows had played tricks on me, that exhaustion and grief over my father had made me hallucinate. But the tracks were still there when I checked the next morning. Massive, impossible tracks that led deep into the forest and then simply vanished, as if the creature had dissolved into air. And the deer carcass was real enough, torn apart with a violence no bear could match. The weeks that followed were the longest of my life. I barely slept. Every sound after dark sent adrenaline flooding through my system. I kept the rifle within arm's reach at all times, loaded and ready. The forest that had once felt like sanctuary now felt like a cage, with something ancient and hungry circling just beyond the firelight. But winter in northern Minnesota is brutal, and the Park Service wouldn't rotate me out until spring. I was trapped with my secret and my terror, counting down the days until I could leave this place forever. Then, 3 weeks after that first encounter, it came back. I was outside chopping wood in the late afternoon, the only time I felt brave enough to be away from the cabin. The sun was already dropping toward the horizon, turning the sky the color of old bruises. That's when I felt it watching me. You know that feeling, right? When the hair on your neck stands up and some ancient part of your brain screams danger. I turned around slowly, axe still in my hands, and there it was at the edge of the clearing. Just standing there in the shadows between the pines, motionless as a statue, those antlers outlined against the darkening sky. We stared at each other for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. My hands tightened on the axe handle. My heart hammered against my ribs. But the creature didn't advance. It just watched me with those impossible eyes, and then it did something that shattered every assumption I'd made about what it was. It lowered its head. Not aggressive, not threatening. Almost submissive. Then it turned and walked away, vanishing back into the forest like mist burning off in morning sun. That became the pattern. Every few days, it would appear at the edge of the clearing, always at dusk or dawn, always keeping distance between us. Never threatening. Just watching. And slowly, so slowly I barely noticed it happening, my terror began to shift into something else. Curiosity. Confusion. A strange, reluctant fascination with this impossible creature that could have killed me 100 times over but chose instead to simply observe. By February, I'd started leaving food out. I told myself I was conducting research, documenting behavior, being scientific about it. The truth was simpler and more complicated. I was lonely. Profoundly, devastatingly lonely in a way I hadn't let myself acknowledge until this creature appeared in my life. And it seemed lonely too. There was something in the way it moved, the way it watched me, a yearning that transcended species and sanity both. I left deer carcasses from animals that died naturally, roadkill brought up from town, meat scraps from my own meals. The offerings were always gone by morning, and sometimes I'd find things left in return. Small arrangements of pine cones. Stones placed in careful patterns. Once, a perfect owl feather laid across my doorstep. Gifts, maybe. Or communication. A way of saying, I see you. You see me. We are not enemies. The turning point came in early March during a blizzard that buried the forest under 5 feet of snow in 36 hours. I'd run out of firewood, hadn't been able to get to the woodshed in time, and the cabin's temperature was dropping fast. I was huddled in every blanket I owned, contemplating whether to risk going outside in whiteout conditions, when I heard a massive thud against the cabin's north wall. Then another. And another. When the storm finally broke the next morning, I opened the door to find a massive stack of firewood piled against the cabin. Perfect logs, already split and dried, enough to last weeks. The creature's tracks led to and from the woodshed, back and forth probably 24 times through chest-deep snow. It had spent hours in that killing storm, carrying wood to keep me alive. I stood there in my doorway, staring at that impossible gift, and I felt something crack open in my chest. Some wall I'd built around my heart after my father died, some protection against caring too much about anything. After that, everything changed. I started talking to it when it appeared at the clearing's edge. At first just weather observations, random thoughts, the kind of things you'd say to a dog or cat. But gradually, I found myself telling it things I'd never said to anyone. About my father's death, about the guilt I felt for being relieved when the suffering finally ended. About the girl I'd loved in college and been too afraid to tell. About the weight of isolation and the fear that I was becoming more ghost than man out here in this frozen wilderness. The creature never responded with words. I don't think it could, or if it could, it chose not to. But it listened. I could see it in the way it angled its head, the way its eyes tracked my face, the subtle shifts in its posture that seemed to communicate understanding. And sometimes, on very cold nights, it would move closer to the cabin, and I'd hear it settling down just outside the walls, a massive presence that felt less like threat and more like guardian. On those nights, I slept better than I had in months. Spring came slowly to northern Minnesota. The snow melted into mud, the lakes thawed with great cracking sounds like the earth itself breaking open, and the forest exploded into green life. With the warmer weather came hikers, tourists, other rangers making their seasonal rounds. The creature disappeared during those months, melting back into the deep wilderness where humans rarely went. But I felt its absence like an ache, counted the days until fall when the crowds would thin and we might resume our strange, impossible friendship. That summer I made a decision. I requested a permanent posting at this remote station. My supervisors were surprised. Most rangers saw places like this as stepping stones to better positions, not career destinations. But I told them I loved the solitude, that I'd found my calling in wilderness conservation. They approved the request, probably relieved to have someone willing to handle the isolation long term. The truth was simpler. I couldn't leave. Not the forest. Not the creature that had become my only real companion. Not this secret life that felt more honest than anything I'd known in civilization. When October came and the first snows fell, I found the creature waiting at the clearing's edge one dawn. Its eyes met mine, and I swear I saw something that might have been relief in that inhuman gaze. I walked closer than I ever had before, close enough to see the texture of its fur, the way ice crystals had formed on its antlers, the impossible architecture of its skeleton visible beneath stretched skin. "Welcome back," I said quietly. "I missed you." The creature made a sound, low and resonant, that same vibration that had terrified me 9 months earlier. But now I heard it differently. Now it sounded less like a threat and more like recognition. Maybe even affection, if such a thing was possible between man and monster. Over the next 5 years, our bond deepened into something I still don't have words for. The creature taught me things about the forest that no textbook or training could convey. Where to find medicinal plants. How to read weather patterns in bird behavior. The secret paths that animals used, invisible to human eyes. In return, I offered companionship, food when winters were harsh, and a safe territory where no hunters would ever venture. But secrets like mine don't stay buried forever. And the outside world was about to come crashing in. Everything fell apart in the winter of 1998. The government announced plans to expand logging operations into our territory. Vast swaths of old-growth forest marked for clear-cutting. Survey teams would be arriving in spring, followed by construction crews, roads, machinery. The wilderness that had been my sanctuary, our sanctuary, was about to be invaded. I tried everything through official channels. Filed environmental impact reports, requested wilderness protection status, contacted every conservation group I could find. But the logging company had powerful friends, and jobs meant more than trees to the people making decisions hundreds of miles away in comfortable offices. The destruction was coming, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The creature knew something was wrong before I told it. Animals always know when their territory is threatened. It had become more agitated that fall, pacing at the clearing's edge, making sounds I'd never heard before, low keening noises that made my bones ache with sympathetic sorrow. When I finally explained what was coming, using maps and gestures and all the shared vocabulary we'd developed over 5 years, I saw something in its eyes that broke my heart. Resignation. The understanding that there was nowhere left to run, that humanity always won in the end, that monsters and wilderness both were relics of a world that no longer existed. "You have to leave," I told it one February night, standing in knee-deep snow while Aurora Borealis painted green fire across the sky. "Go north, deep into Canada where they can't reach you. My voice cracked. "I'll miss you. God, I'll miss you. But you have to survive." The creature stepped closer than it ever had before. Close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from its body, could smell the wild scent of it. Pine and earth and something ancient. It reached out one massive hand, claws extended, and for a heartbeat I thought this was how it ended, that it would finally kill me after all these years. But instead, it placed that hand on my shoulder, gentle as any human touch, and made a sound so full of sorrow that I felt tears freeze on my face. We stood like that for a long time. Man and monster, alone in the frozen wilderness under dancing stars. Then it released me, stepped back and spoke. I swear it spoke. Not in English, not in any language I knew, but I understood it anyway in some deep place beyond words. "I won't leave you." The survey teams arrived in April. I did what I could to slow them down, sent them to wrong locations, reported false bear sightings, generally made myself as incompetent and obstructive as possible without getting fired. But there were too many of them spread across too much territory. It was only a matter of time. The encounter happened on a bright Tuesday morning in late May. 3 surveyors had ventured deeper into the backcountry than they were supposed to, marking trees with orange paint that looked like wounds against the bark. I was tracking them, trying to herd them back towards safer areas, when I heard the screaming. I ran, crashed through underbrush and over fallen logs, rifle in hand, knowing with sick certainty what I'd find. The creature had one surveyor pinned against a tree, its massive frame blocking out the sun, making sounds that were pure threat. The other 2 surveyors were on the ground, unharmed but paralyzed with terror. And in the creature's eyes, I saw something I'd never seen before. Desperation. The trapped animal knowledge that violence was the only language these intruders would understand. "Stop!" I shouted, raising the rifle. Not aiming at the creature. God, I couldn't, but making myself part of the scene, forcing its attention toward me. "Let him go. Please." The creature's head swiveled toward me, those ancient eyes finding mine across 30 yards of forest. I saw the question there. Whose side are you on? After everything, do you choose them or me? I lowered the rifle. Let it drop to the ground at my feet. "Let him go," I said again, softer. "This isn't the way. You know it isn't. For 5 eternal seconds, nothing moved. The surveyor whimpered against the tree trunk. Birds had fallen silent. The whole forest seemed to be holding its breath. Then the creature released its victim, backed away slowly, and disappeared into the deep woods without looking back. The aftermath was exactly what I'd feared. The surveyors reported a massive bear attack, but their descriptions were too strange, too detailed. Wildlife officials came in, then state police, then federal agents when someone found the old tracks around my cabin and started asking questions. I stuck to my story. It was a bear, they were mistaken about the size. Trauma does strange things to memory. But the investigation brought attention, brought more people into our territory, and brought the logging operation to a complete halt while they assessed the threat. I never saw the creature again. Not at the clearing's edge, not in the deep forest, not anywhere. It was gone, vanished as completely as if it had never existed at all. I tell myself it went north like I'd begged it to, found sanctuary in the Canadian wilderness where there were still places wild enough to hide impossible things. But some nights I wonder if it died out there alone, choosing oblivion over a world that had no space left for mystery. The logging operation resumed that fall, but on a much smaller scale, restricted to specific areas and subject to constant monitoring. I'm not sure if that's victory or just slower defeat. I'm still here 27 years later, an old man now by ranger standards. Still walking these trails, still looking for signs that I'm not alone. Still carrying this secret that weighs more with every passing year. I'm telling you this story because I'm tired of silence. Because the world is getting smaller and louder and more certain about what's real, and I think we're losing something essential in all that certainty. I'm telling you because I want you to know that there are things in this world older than we can imagine, stranger than we can accept, and sometimes, very rarely, those things can recognize us across the impossible distance between species, between understanding, between what we know and what we fear. I'm telling you because on cold nights when the forest goes completely silent, I still hear that resonant sound, low and vibrating, somewhere between threat and greeting. And I like to think it means, I remember you. You remember me. That's something. That's enough. My name is John Mackenzie. I'm 55 years old. And I saw a Wendigo eating something horrifying. Then it noticed me. And for 10 extraordinary years, we weren't hunter and prey, monster and man. We were just 2 lonely souls sharing a wilderness, keeping each other's secrets, proving that compassion can exist in the strangest places if you're brave enough to recognize it. That's my confession. That's my truth. And I wouldn't trade it for anything.